I'm Will. I'm the executive director of the Out Foundation, and we're in Seattle today for our Don't Be an Asshole tour, which is basically our way of introducing the idea of trans inclusion and non-binary inclusion in binary spaces, specifically fitness and gyms. So welcome to the Seattle version of the Don't Be an Asshole tour from the Out Foundation. Just to give you a bit of background, my name is Will. I'm the founder of the Out Foundation and serve as the executive director of this foundation. Just a bit about us. Our mission is that we believe by nurturing, empowering, and celebrating LGBTQ bodies and minds that we are ensuring that our community thrives. We do that in a few different ways. One is removing barriers, and that barriers are a few different things to us. They are access, they are inclusion, which is what this is all about. So inclusion is very, very important to the Out Foundation, and what we strive to do with that is really make sure that everyone feels included in a fitness facility, in any health and wellness aspect of their life, or any business that they have to go into. So this is what we're kind of attacking here. We also provide access. So as part of our mission, we have a scholarship program that provides access to fitness facilities for LGBTQ young adults who apply through our site for a scholarship. They can, we have two application processes, or two application dates in April and in October, and we provide a full year gym membership, a CrossFit gym membership. They get meals from one of our partners, they get shoes, and they get a private coach who's on staff that they meet with 30 minutes a week to make sure that they're on their nutrition and on their attendance requirements for this scholarship. So it's our way to kind of pay it forward, to bring more people into the fold of fitness, to kind of celebrate what we all take for granted as being a part of a really cool community that is CrossFit, and a really accepting community. So we have kids, not kids, they hate it when I call them kids, young adults, all across the United States who are part of this, and we just closed applications in April, or on April 30th, so we have another 100 and something odd applications to filter through for our next class. So it's going to be super fun. So that's the other thing. And then third thing is celebrating. We celebrate our community through OutWOD, which is our workouts that we do. We celebrate through drag shows that we do around Pride. We celebrate through a lot of different initiatives. And we educate, and that's what we're doing here, is educating, kind of celebrating, advocating, all the fun things. This is a wrapped up in one. I talked about all those things. If you want to know more, head to the website. So what is this? This is not a science lesson. It is not a debate on trans inclusion, because trans inclusion is a must. There's no debate over it. And this is not a place to air your grievances or ours. This is, however, a safe space. So any question you ask, it's a safe space. We don't want you to feel nervous about asking anything. This is where we want you to learn. This is, like I said, a learning environment. It's an open and honest look at inclusion. So where we have faltered as a community in inclusion, but also where we can make up for those faults. And this is an education for everyone here to become a better ally. And that's why this is happening. So what is it going to look like? We got a brief educational. We're sitting here right now. Panel discussion with these beauties, and then an audience Q&A, which will be the meat of what we're doing. So we're going to present a lot of education. You're going to soak that in, and then I want all your questions because Alyssa and Chloe are a wealth of information. You just have to pull it out of them.
You don't have to pull that.
Well, right, you don't have to pull that. They like to talk. So, Chloe, I put your new picture up. Chloe, Alyssa, and myself. So a bit about the trans community in America. There are 1.4 million transgender adults in America. This is an estimate because there's no census question. There's no way to truly know this. The answer to this, we expect it to be a little higher because there are those communities in which trans folks live that if they said that they were trans, it would not be safe for them to be there. And only 22 states have explicit statewide protections for the trans community when it comes to employment, housing, and public accommodations, which means if you're a mathematician, 28 states do not, which means a majority do not. There are absolutely zero nationwide protections. And in October 2017, former Attorney General Jeff Sessions issued a statement that sex, as stated in Title VII, means biological sex, not gender identity. This is a huge deal. As you know, in our current administration, there's a lot of hurdles that we are trying to overcome. That is just one, which is a blow. In 2018, there were at least 26 reported homicides of transgender folks for being trans. Again, those are reported. We've already had at least 6 this year in the US, which makes it even more a reason that inclusion is important, and the conversations that we're having today are so important. I think we have one more little thing that pops up. And 92% of the victims are trans women of color. So it pinpoints even more of this, of where our attention needs to be focused in this conversation. So the American Academy of Pediatrics states that there are between 29 and 50% of trans or non-binary teens have attempted suicide, whereas 14% of the larger population. 14 compared to 14% of their cisgender peers. So this is a bigger conversation, especially when we're talking about youth and making them feel more accepted and more nothing is wrong with you, which is really hard when you're growing up and you feel like something is not right and you can't place it. So kind of having these conversations. Definitions. So cisgender is an adjective. It describes a person whose gender identity aligns with their sex assigned at birth. We say sex assigned at birth because that is all it is. The doctor pulls you out or you somehow come out, and I've never witnessed this, so I just know that magic happens. And you have the circle of life moment where he holds you up, Simba, and it's like this goes here or this goes here based on what? Anatomy. Not anything to do with how your gender will be presenting when you grow up. Transgender, as we're going to use it today and always, also an adjective. It describes a broad range of people who experience and or express their gender that does not match the sex assigned at birth or physically changing their sex. The pinpoint here is transgender is an adjective. It is not a noun. This will be it's a common mistake that many people who aren't educated in what we're doing here or what the trans community is make. But it's an easy one to correct, because you will hear people in conversation, oh, my friend is a transgender. And you're like, hey, that's awesome, but they are not a transgender. They're just transgender. It's like saying, I am a tall, or Chloe is a short. A short what? Yeah. So that's the biggest one, but that has been the easiest one to start educating people on, because they're like, oh, I had no idea. And that kind of opens that conversation, that cracks that shell that, oh, okay, we can have a conversation about this and you're not going to be, mean about it. The term includes people who are transsexual and otherwise gender non-conforming, and not all people who consider themselves transgender will undergo and my screen cut off, undergo surgery to identify. Pronouns we're going to speak about today are he, him, she, her, they, them. It's just a shorthand version of the term that you identify as. And in action, using the correct pronouns is the first step to acknowledging someone. That's why we have them on our little name tags. Makes it super simple. It also makes it like you do this at Rocket. Introduce yourself in the circle. What's your name? What's your pronoun? And it just makes people feel very included. And it's a very simple thing. So what I would like to do, I know we already introduced ourselves to the person next to us, but I would like you to introduce yourself next to the person again with your name and your pronoun. Go for it. Okay, cool, you did it. Amazing. We're going to talk a bit about non-binary. Non-binary, at its most basic, means that a person does not identify as a man or a woman, but as something else. In history, third genders have traditionally been acknowledged in a number of Native American cultures as two-spirit people, including traditional Hawaiian and Samoan cultures. So it's not a new fad thing that all your friends think, oh yeah, they're just doing it because it's cool. They don't want to be, it's in style, but it's been around in many, many cultures. This is going to be Chloe's slide that she's going to speak about gender transition and the different tracks of that.
I am Chloie Jönsson. I am on the board of directors for the Out Foundation. I am also the human being that went up against CrossFit about 4.5 years ago because they would not let me compete as a woman, and they said that I needed to compete as a man. For many people, being transgender, a lot of people think that that is completely binary, male or female, and then going to the extreme to be the other. For a lot of people, there is a whole bunch in the middle. So we cannot assume just because someone says that they are trans, that they have been the opposite sex, that they want to be the opposite sex. They can be somewhere in this giant gray area. I dated a trans man who was a trans cis man that identified as trans because he felt like a woman, but he didn't want to actually go through any of the process to become a woman because that was too fearful for him. This is just a quick example. So if someone says they're trans, we just can't assume, right? What else am I touching on here? Yes, the medical transition. Not everyone can afford financially the medical aspects. So not everyone can afford to have gender reassignment surgery or afford hormones or afford changing their name or doing all of those other things that go along with it. So again, our assumption that they want to change doesn't mean that they are able to change. So we have to keep that in mind as well. And then what was the third thing? It just got real hot in here.
Coming out.
Oh yeah, the coming out process. This is a huge process. For me, it was somewhat easy because I was 15 years old. My parents handled everything for me, and then everything, because I was not 18, went under lock and key with the government. That is not necessarily the case anymore. If you are over 18, it is a huge process to undergo. There are a lot of association is not what I'm looking for, but organizations that will help with this process. So we do have resources for that, correct? Yes. So ping us and we'll get you the right info.
Oh, this is your other slide. Words matter.
Oh, words do matter. Okay. Words that should probably never be spoken if you are not trans. I love this one. Tranny. Story. I do have stories. So I did transition almost 25 years ago, and tranny was a very common term back then. Also, one of the world's most famous bars, the Tranny Shack, was up and running and popping. So you might hear some trans people use that word. I use it. Other trans people will get offended by it. But I use it because for me, it means something. I don't have to go into that right now. But as a hetero person or non-trans person, you should probably stay away from that. Or the shim, or the shemale, or TS. Most of these things are things you're gonna see like in the back pages ads of Craigslist, in like the sexual thing. So they just, porn. Yeah, or porn. It's just not cohesive to being a cool person if you're using these words.
More words matter. So we avoid using the term biological sex, instead use gender assigned at birth. Again, it's never something that you talk about or should ever need to talk about. Oh, Chloe's gender assigned at birth was male. Like, where would I need to speak that? Nowhere. Never ask real name. So I have a story, which is kind of the birth of this whole education that we're doing. In 2016-ish, yeah, Chloe and I were hanging out in Reno, Nevada, where she lives. Nevada. I always do it wrong. And we'd been friends since like 2014. We became good friends. And I asked her just point blank, I was like, what did your name used to be? And innocently asked this question. And she was like, none of your business. And we moved on. But it was a learning opportunity for me because she was my only trans friend. And I'd never been close enough to someone to, ask that type of question, and I didn't know it was a bad question to ask. But learning from that, it kind of spawned this whole tour or the thought of this tour, so that everyone could learn these things. But never ask someone their real name. You could use instead birth name, but you don't ask this question at all. And then transsexual is a term that is very medical and very precise. It refers to someone who has undergone a medical transition. So to use it as a blanket term for trans or transgender is never good. I avoid saying it at all costs just because it's an old name. Yeah. So dead naming is kind of what I sort of did with Chloe, asking her what that dead name was. And Chloe can talk about dead naming and what it means for you.
It's so long ago. It's so childlike to me, but it doesn't matter, right? When we ask a transgender person a question, does it matter to who they are now? Does it matter to you? Why are we asking this question? Does it matter if my name was Bob or Sam or, I don't know, some other name? Yeah. It's really not relevant. I mean, you don't ask people in normal conversation what they were called as a kid. Like, did you have any weird names as a kid? Like, it's just, why is it important? And I think it's that greater curiosity of like the whole learning about a transgender person's life. Some people, it'll send them into like immediate dark spot because their whole identification as that other gender was so dark that even thinking of that name or bringing up that name will send them right back to that horrible spot, right? So it's just, I get it, you're curious, but like, let's just let it go.
Yeah. And dead naming also occurs when you use that person's former name and try to address them now.
Happens in family,
a lot.
Situations.
And being a witness to that and seeing someone kind of shut down when they're called their dead name is because I've seen it in action. It kind of takes you back. You're like, whoa, this is a bad thing. It's like we brought up something that should never be discussed, and we're now not honoring that person with who they are or truly accepting who they are if we're not respecting that name or respecting their new name. In ways you may be an accidental asshole. As we know, it happens, right? And this is for gym specific. This is written in our fitness realm. A lot of these things, or none of these things Rocket does. But it's a great way to kind of learn what's happening. So on intake forms at the gym, typically we'll ask first name, last name, sex. And you have to ask yourself, why? And you're like, because the software makes me.
Well, most of the software doesn't now.
Yeah.
We got them to change. Like, it took me 3 years, but we got Zen Planner to take it off.
Zen Planner has now taken it off.
Yeah.
We've worked with Wodify to take theirs off. Tribe has now taken off. The requirement, all gyms can specify if they want to ask these questions. They can also specify how you show up on the leaderboards, if you want it to be gendered or just full list of gyms. So if any of your gyms use either of those three softwares, know that they have made a choice on how things are displayed. So if you're like, hey, you should switch it to the alphabetical, they'll be like, what do you know about that? You're like, I learned something.
I'm Alyssa Royse. My husband and I started Rocket CrossFit 8 years ago and always had a vision of it being a sort of wildly inclusive place. I've often made fun of him for being a sweet delusional hippie, thinking he could save the world with the empowerment of fitness. And it turned out he was right. We both come from super queer families, and so that was always very important to us. And we sort of thought we had it nailed. And then Chloe's story with CrossFit came to be, and Chloe will tell you more of her story, but long story short, CrossFit banned Chloe from competing because she's transgender. And I got real pissed, basically, is what happened. And so I fired off a blog post and basically called CrossFit every name in the book and told them all sorts of horrible things and said I was going to leave CrossFit forever, and I was done. And at the same time reached out to Chloe and said, hey, we've got your back here at Rocket. We didn't end up leaving CrossFit. What ended up happening was an incredibly productive, long, and surprisingly compassionate conversation with CrossFit. And they made very clear that they actually were about all the same things we were about. They were about inclusion, and they were about health and wellness for everybody, and they wanted to empower people. And they pretty much knew they had done the wrong thing. So we after 4 years, long story short, they changed their mind. Last summer at the Games, they officially repealed the ban on transgender athletes competing, and are really plowing forward into what does it look like when fitness is truly inclusive. So RX weight's super common in CrossFit. Those of you who are CrossFitters, you know you'll often see a workout that says men do 95, women do 65. So we don't do that at Rocket. And it's a point of some contention sometimes with people because they're like, well, what should I do? The truth is that what you can and should do is not based on your gender at all. It's based on how you're feeling that day, it's based on your strength, and it's based on a whole variety of things. So at Rocket, what we do, instead of men do this and women do this, we do a percentage of 1 rep max, or we do how many you can do in an unbroken set of 8, whatever. So that what we're doing is working on helping you figure out how to find out where you are in your body, because the truth is, if I want everybody to get stronger, which is in theory my goal, I want them operating in a certain sort of metabolic response. If I have people all doing the same, it's going to be different. So the example that I use, some of you know my daughter is a very competitive weightlifter, my husband, who's a not competitive but definitely a doodly dude, and me. If we went in and did a workout where it said men 95 pounds and women 65 pounds for a snatch, I would probably be in the hospital because I cannot snatch 65 pounds. My daughter would not even be warmed up because that is literally not a warm-up weight for her. And 95 pounds is a bit heavy for my husband, but he could maybe do it, but he would get a good workout at 65. So if the 3 of us walked in and the women were supposed to do 65 and the men were supposed to do 95, have any of the 3 of us gotten an appropriate workout? No, not a single one. So we don't do RX weights at Rocket at all. We will use them for benchmarks, but mostly what we'll do is we'll tell people to just write down your benchmark of what you did and track it yourself. We also, if you can actually look around, this is fun. I usually do this at gyms where I can't just point. Yeah. But our bars say 33 pounds and 45 pounds. They don't say men's bars and women's bars. We do make clear that if you're going to compete, men are going to be given a 45-pound bar and women are going to be given a 33-pound bar, but that's a function of competitive sport, not a function of fitness. And those two things are really, really, really different for us at Rocket. I don't have, 90% of my members here are here for general fitness. They're not here for competitive sport. And so we don't do men's bars and women's bars. That seems obvious. Our bathroom, we only have the one, but now you can actually see our handy print symbol with the purple kettlebell. There's no reason for men and women to have, for gendered bathrooms. We went to a gym in Colorado, which was awesome because the guy who owned the gym was every stereotype in the book of this guy is not going to get it and he's going to be a total douchebag and I'm going to regret spending time with him.
He was one of my greatest friends, but Alyssa didn't have any idea.
No, I mean, it was like all of my signals. If he walked towards me at a bar, I would fake a seizure to get out of it. Turned out, of course, because first impressions are bullshit and we should not always count on them, he was great. But they had just a bathroom with stalls, right? Which is, a lot of people would be like, oh, that one I could gender. No gender. There's just stupid. You can actually pee next to somebody and not know what they've got going on, right? And then leaderboards was actually a big turning point for Rocket. Some of you were here at the time when we went through this, but we have a pretty big trans and non-binary population here. And we had leaderboards, just like every other CrossFit gym out there. And I had a member come to me because they had earned a spot on the leaderboard. But they didn't know where to go because they did not identify as either male or female. And it was this I'm actually tearing up now, but I literally cried because it was this person that I care a great deal about, and I had gone out of my way to create an environment that I thought was accepting and inclusive. But I had leaderboards, and I had a member who had earned a spot on a leaderboard and had nowhere to go anyway, which is a lot of what is going to have to happen if we're going to help create change. Those of us who are well-intentioned, right, the path to hell paved in, have to be willing to sit there and say, dude, I had good intentions and I still made this big mistake. So what we did was, as a gym, we had a conversation. We literally called meetings. We had conversations on Facebook, how are we going to handle this? And we actually just gave up leaderboards. We don't need them. And that was really, for us, a big turning point when I realized, oh, right, that's right. We're not about competitive fitness. Leaderboards don't matter. You know, we're about like general fitness, not competitive sport. So we took leaderboards down. I don't think that having leaderboards makes you an asshole. I want to be super, super clear on that. But it does create an opportunity where you have to be willing to sit down and, as Chloe said, ask yourself, why? Why am I asking this? What is it doing? And then you also have to sit down and say, who am I uninviting? Because when I had leaderboards up there and I had a member looking me in the eyeballs saying, where do I go? I realized I had set this beautiful, beautiful table and very specifically said to somebody, but you are not invited. So sometimes the things we do have really unintended consequences, and you can have the biggest heart in the world and still shut someone out.
Well, I've been to a gym recently that their leaderboard was only lifts, and it was based on a percentage of body weight. So it was just like Karen, Jill, Bob, whoever, whatever there was. And if you were lifting 300% of your body weight, you got above the person who lifted 280 of their body weight, and it didn't matter who it was. So it was just like all together, which was kind of really cool to see. There was they only had lifts. They didn't have like Fran and Grace and all that stuff that have like the Lanier. Anyway, just throwing it in there. So the panel, these two, I have questions that some of you submitted online. Thank you. So I'm going to go through those, and then we'll open it up to all the things.
Can I introduce who we are first?
Sure.
So
We didn't do that.
No.
Oh, shit. So I would like to introduce our panel. Chloe, would you like to introduce yourself?
Like I said briefly, I am Chloie Jönsson. I am 39 years old. I started CrossFit somewhere between 29 and 30. Did we say? It doesn't really matter when. Anyways, came into fitness late in life. I am on the board of directors for the Out Foundation. Back home, I am COO of a handful of businesses that run and operate out of Reno, Nevada. And I am the human being that took on CrossFit in 2014 because they would not let me compete as a woman. They said that I had to compete as a man. So I think I inadvertently brought us all together. Mm-hmm. Yeah, look at that. Hey. I met Will shortly after that. I internetally met Alyssa right after that. She was one of the few people that got through like the bombardment of people trying to get at me, and my life has like never been the same since I met these two. Okay.
I'm Alyssa. I own Rocket. When CrossFit said Chloe couldn't compete, those of you who know me will not be surprised to know I got real pissed and real loud about it. And I reached out to Chloe, and then also got very well connected with CrossFit HQ. And long story short, this summer at the Games, CrossFit officially removed their ban on transgender athletes competing, and I might have cried heavily holding Greg's hand. Like it was a big deal. Yeah.
And if you're going this year, come join us at the Big Gay Happy Hour, August 2nd, in Madison, Wisconsin. Now I have questions. Yes, please, Madison. Take a small, short journey. La 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 la. Who can answer this? Alyssa, as an ally and gym owner, what have you implemented at your gym to make your gym a safe space for trans members? I feel like we've covered that.
We did. There's a couple other things I would add though.
Yeah.
I think that gym owners, we often have these ideas of who we are and what we want to create, and we don't always get those ideas out in the world. And I think that there's little things that gym owners, there's 2 gym owners in the room, but there's little things you can do if you own a business. And it's as simple as things like in your marketing materials, are you just sticking with stereotypes or are you showing an inclusive population? Are you putting up visible little signs? It's like as stupid as the little rainbow sticker in our window is, it actually matters. Like it is telling somebody you're safe here. And so I think you have to always go that extra step to put forward an invitation and then just not be an asshole if somebody comes in. There used to be a slide in here, the things changed a little bit, about what to say if somebody comes to you and says, I am trans or I am queer or I am this. And the correct answer as a business owner and someone trying to facilitate a community, the correct answer is simply thank you. What can I do for you?
You just answered that question.
Oh, was it? But I think it's really important because they're sort of tempted to say all of these things to like prove our awesomeness and our allyship and I sort of knew and whatever. And instead you just say, cool, thanks. Like, don't let me know if you need anything from me.
Or like, how can I support you?
How can I support you? And then you have to listen to what they say, like that whole leaderboard thing.
And cry.
Yeah, and cry.
And then take it.
Yeah, and then write a blog post, and you know.
Chloie Jönsson. Have you ever felt discriminated against in a fitness facility? If so, how?
I mean,
Besides being publicly outed and banned
Yeah.
from competing.
until that point, I had
In a
not
facility.
been. Yeah, until that point, I hadn't. But I don't really. I mean, we kind of went over that.
It's so great. All the questions that come through are like, we answer them, sort of.
While we're talking.
Yeah. Why is the term cross-dressing offensive?
Oh, it's usually a sexual thing, I think. I mean, and I'm not just like pretending to be a woman. Like, I am a woman. Cross-dressing doesn't apply to any transgender person, I don't believe, unless you're trans and then you cross-dress for sex. But I don't. That's a whole rabbit hole. Let's not go down that.
Yeah.
It's just offensive and non-applicable.
This is for both of you. How do you respond to those who say that trans women have a biological advantage over cis women in athletic/physical competition?
Shut up.
Well, it's just, I mean, let's just call it what it is. It's just not true. And there's never been a single study out there that shows that trans women have a competitive advantage over cis women. Like, there's the transgender athletes have been allowed in the Olympics for what, 25 years now? And there's like, it hasn't happened. Like, there's nobody winning. And somebody's probably going to ask about Caster Semenya. We need to be super damn good and clear that we understand she is not transgender. She is intersex. And what's going on, I very humbly believe to be sexist, racist. But it's not, there's no advantage. There isn't.
I don't think there's any. I work my ass off just to compete with the people next to me. I put in the hours, I put in the time, and I feel like most athletes do the same thing. There's regulations and guidelines for a reason. Up until last year, the Olympics said that trans women had to have had reassignment surgery, and last year they even took that out of the equation. So now your hormones just have to be in alignment. But cisgender women have to have their hormones in alignment as well. So if a cisgender woman produces naturally too much testosterone, according to the regulations, she would not be allowed to compete either.
Well, that's the thing with Caster, right?
Well, yeah, she has an intersex condition. I think one of the things that I think it's important to acknowledge is that this is a really gray and fuzzy area, and I don't think anybody fully understands it, and I think it's going to be rapidly evolving. So as CrossFit, for instance, was working on the regulations, you know, I was having conversations saying this is a starting point. This is where we're going to start. As the science, and I'm not taking credit for all of that, but I was on the phone a lot. The science is evolving and it's changing and we're getting more of an understanding. The thing that's interesting to me is that the more the science evolves, the more we realize that gender is kind of a useless idea, right? So it is not just hormones, it is not just chromosomes, it is not just anything. It's this whole huge constellation of things. Like, we are all snowflakes, no lie. And so I think it's changing. And I understand that people want to protect this idea of fair play. Like, it's just super important and it's baked into sports. The truth is, there has never been such thing as fair. And Michael Phelps remains the best example. And I've been using this example for like years, and now it's finally all over the internet. But Michael Phelps has Marfan syndrome. As a result of Marfan syndrome, his connective tissue is both stronger and more flexible. He has longer limbs. He literally has flippers, right? He also has twice as much oxygen in his blood as your average person, and he produces half as much lactic acid. So when it comes to training, that means he can train like a mofo and never get sore, right? He has an unfair advantage, genetically, chromosomally, in all of these ways. Sports is not fair. It has never been fair. So as Chloe said, all you can do is get people trying their hardest, training their hardest, and trying to hit that mark. Somebody is probably always going to be faster and stronger than you. That's all there is to it. And so we have to, as far as competitive sports, it's just going to be a moving target. I am fascinated to see where this goes. And people like bring up my daughter who's on a college scholarship and is a highly elite lifter. And will say, how would you feel if some trans woman was going to compete against your daughter? Like, she might have less of a chance of winning then. And I'm like, yeah, she might, But my daughter having a little bit less of a chance of winning compared to somebody having absolutely no chance at all of competing. Like, you'd have to be you just have to be an to care about that, right? So there's a lot of giving up. We're very married to this idea of they who tries hardest wins. That's not always the case. And I think that sports has to evolve. Tangent.
That was amazing.
Thank you.
Now it's y'all. Your questions, and it can be directed at one or all of us.
But this is the part we look forward to the
Yeah,
most,
don't
so
be
you
shy.
actually have to play along.
Yeah. Like, even if you don't want to ask it, just ask anyway.
This is totally a safe area too. You can literally ask anything
Anything.
at this point, and we will answer it to the best of our abilities.
Oh, yeah.
Ooh, it's like being on a talk show. I love this.
I'm gonna Vanna the mic.
You
Back
won't
to Bo.
hear yourself, just so you know.
Hi. I'm just curious, how many cities have you guys done?
This is 12.
12 cities. So what have you observed just geographically in terms of like the questions that you've got, and what have been your observations as you've traveled around and given this talk across the country?
It's been really inspiring, actually, to see who comes out, because we've done, we were all over. We've done
We
Nashville.
packed the house in Durham. Like,
Yeah.
Durham was
had like 70 people show
off
up.
the hook, and they were like in it. I was
Yeah.
getting emails from people in Durham, like
Yeah.
weeks of emails of how do I?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The amount of information that is clearly not out there and people are seeking something like this is not inspiring. Like, we're filling a hole, right? We're filling a gap in the education. Obviously this information is out on the internet. Please, everything's out on the internet. But being able to go into these underserved, Durham is not underserved. They have like 3 colleges there. Like, there are humans there that know things. Humans know things, it's weird. But to be able to go in and you see this excitement. So to answer your question, like, we went to New York, we went to DC, we went to San Francisco. Those cities, we found more.
I feel like in the bigger cities where there's bigger LGBT presence, there was more technical gym questions on how to make everything gender neutral. In the other cities, I found there was a lot more interactive questions on how to just interact with transgender members and those kinds of things.
Yeah, I'd say that. Like, the bigger metro cities weren't really concerned with jargon because they live it every day, whereas the smaller southern towns really wanted to learn more of the meat of what we're offering. As a vegetarian.
I think the biggest issue that I noticed, we had a lot of questions about the weights.
Yeah.
Getting rid of the women's and men's weights, changing that verbiage. How is that going to happen in a competitive gym? So on and so forth. It's really easy. If you just do it, people will follow.
Really
It's that simple.
Yeah, I guess I can stem off of that a little bit as a gym manager and head coach there.
Which gym?
CrossFit Epiphany in Vancouver, Washington.
Oh, okay. I was like, I
Yeah,
don't know
well, it's
them.
a ways
Cool.
away.
Welcome.
Thank you. Excellent. Love the area, right? So competitive CrossFit gym, right?
Mm-hmm.
We still
You're
have
very competitive. Yeah.
we still have weights and such that are very gendered.
Mm-hmm.
If we were to change that up, obviously, which is the direction we're going,
Mm-hmm.
how would you incorporate that into a competition if you were to do a local in-house competition as well? So, like, what kind of divisions would you have, if you have divisions, or
I
would
have
it
an
be just
answer.
all people compete against everyone? I would love to hear your
So
answer.
here's how we do it at Rocket. Oh, you don't need that. Okay. So we did a gender-free competition at Rocket, and it was a partners competition just because I love partner wads. And what we did was we made divisions, not based on gender, but based on your ability to do X. And so if you could lift this much and jump this high and do whatever, you were this division if you could do it that way. So we actually totally got rid of gender. It was beautiful.
So what do you call the divisions actually? We were talking about that too.
You could call them anything. I think that we chose like fruits or something, like something that couldn't be like, I think we tried animals and it was like, but a T-Rex is inherently stronger than a velociraptor. And so like we were trying to find
We didn't want to call it like beginner or something.
No. We like literally, I think, named it after food. Because usually my husband and I are hungry, as a rule.
We do our showdowns as Division 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
Like, it's like overthinking it is, you
Yeah.
know, the root of all evil.
Yeah, or colors, or whatever. Nobody cared. I mean, people actually loved it. The problem at the time, Zen Planner still wouldn't let you register without a gender. Now they do, which was really, shout out to them when I called them 3 years ago and said, I'm going to switch unless you get rid of gender. And they were like, everybody has gender. I'm like, okay, so I can't switch. It's an empty threat. But still, they had to rebuild their entire system to get gender out. So I'm like forever loyal to them because they did that. But yeah, you don't.
So based on ability,
Based on ability.
level, not.
Yeah, based on ability. Because like my husband and I, no, I couldn't go head to head with either one of them. But Maria back there, like Maria and I could go head to head, So.
You would also want to put a disclaimer, like anyone clearly gaming the division process will be...
We will bump you.
Yeah. Because if you can see that after the first workout, right?
Yeah.
And that's a disclaimer we have on our stuff too. Like,
Yeah.
if you're clearly gaming the division system, you will be asked to leave.
Yeah.
This is, I mean, it's not it's easy in theory. Our gym back home that I oversee, we took away all the weights, but then I went and started taking some of the classes, and the coaches that were writing the burn class, which is like the cardio class, were still prescribing 35 and 53 for kettlebells. And I was like, what are you doing? We don't do this anymore. Well, that's just the weights they should use. So even though we had taken all the other weights out of all the other workouts, they were still so programmed that they weren't even thinking, just because it's a cardio class, I still have to do that, right? So even in a gym that had been doing it for a while, it was still getting through just because it had been so ingrained.
We had it sneak in because people want something. So we took out like male, female workout weights, but we left in competitor weights because I liked it as a way to emphasize there's a difference between competitive and fitness. But it was still like, it was sneaking onto the board. So I was like, guys, no, like don't do that. So we just put it in our app. Like this isn't competition, but in the workouts, it's in the app. So there'll be the workout and it'll say, here are the competition weights. It's in the app, but now we've made very clear it doesn't go on the board. So.
And there's lots of gyms that will segregate, for lack of a better word, the competitive people versus the general population, which if you have that atmosphere in your gym, I can see that working. I am a competitive person. I am a competitive athlete. If you go and tell me to do whatever weight I feel, I am going to scope it out and see who did the heaviest and probably go a half a pound above that and try and do that. And then still try to beat them. So you do have to feel out your atmosphere, and you don't want to take the competitiveness away from the competitive people.
No, it's fun.
Because that is part of the aspect.
Well, we still put on the workouts when they get written on the board. You will usually, nobody's done Monday's workout yet. It's up there because I'm coaching at 4:30 and don't want to have to come in extra early to write on the board. But the daily workouts, people's weights get put on there just so people can see because it's a fun game to play. But it's not by gender. Maria?
Maria in the back.
Wait.
I knew one name.
I
I
feel
got one
like
name.
I'm at work or something. Makes me nervous. When you took on CrossFit, were there athletes or any of the well-known athletes that supported you? Did anyone, come out and support the cause?
There were. Christmas Abbott was actually the only athlete that spoke out at the time. There was people that came to me from behind the scenes, so I'm not going to out them because they were worried about how CrossFit would react to them supporting me. But I did have support. I mean, it was I would say it was 75% support and then 25% just real people. So there was not as much negative. Well, I wasn't exposed to as much negative as there probably was out there. I didn't ever read comments or go...
Instagram didn't exist back then.
I didn't go below the articles. For a week, I had friends that actually took my phone from me and they screened everything for me. So if messages were coming in, they were just deleting them. So I had a good group around me. But there was people. Yeah, it wasn't like me against the whole CrossFit world.
So I think personally, like I think a lot of the language that we use and the patterns that we use as we move through the world are simply habitual, right? So we're taught from the time we get our first Dick and Jane book that there's boy and there's girl and boys do this and girls do this. A lot of the way we move through the world is simply habitual, right? And so you are by simply correcting, not making a big scene, because if you make a big scene, you put them on the spot, right? You just say, they say he, you say they, and then you grab the kettlebell. That's it. That's all I gotta do.
You're not alone, right? Most of our country has not interacted, to their knowledge, with a transgender person. I lived in Florida briefly. We don't need to get into it, but I was there for 3 months.
It was a dark moment.
But I met numerous people that said they had never even heard the word transgender before. So it was like a constant educational tour every day that I went out, if like it came up, right? So you're not alone. It's a giant learning process for everybody. And I'm still learning. Everything changes over time. The vocabulary we had 25 years ago is not the vocabulary we have now. I still catch myself saying biological male or biological female because that was the terminology we used then.
Now we used it 2 years ago.
Right, and now it's changed to cis, which is the Latin verbiage, correct?
Yep.
Just like sex reassignment surgery is not what you say anymore. It's gender affirmation surgery. You're not alone.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to ask questions. If someone talks to you about their transness, use that as a learning opportunity and ask your questions then because they're opening up, right? Just don't ask them what their name was. So.
Or if they've had surgery, because that's none of your business.
Yeah.
I have a piggyback on that.
Yes.
So my friend Jack, I met Jack as a woman, and then a week later, so Jack and his girlfriend, we were out, we met, but I met Jack as a woman with Laura, his wife. Now, the next week, that was literally the week that I met him, and the second week was when he decided that he wanted to begin his journey. So I always caught myself saying she so quick, right away, because I had just met him, right? So I think, but it was never a big issue, right? I would just say, oh yeah, Jack and Laura, Jack, and I would say she, and I would correct myself, but not make a big deal about it. And I think a lot of times we will tend to go, oh my God, I'm so sorry. And I think that is more appalling when you do that than just quickly correcting yourself, especially when someone's so quick or so new in their trans journey. Would that be correct to assume?
Yeah, we were just talking about this last night.
Yeah.
I mean, who has just inadvertently, accidentally misgendered someone that they know just by accident?
I call my husband by my ex-husband's name sometimes.
So, and we don't make a big deal out of it. So don't make a big deal out of it. Just carry on. If you see that person's face drop, quietly apologize and move on. But just don't make it a bigger deal than it needs to be.
Yeah, and that's what Jack told me. He's like, dude, chill. I was like,
Yeah, it happens.
anyway. I'm just trying to think of things that come up,
Kind of going on the conversation about having cis dudes in spaces.
Yeah.
Can I talk a little bit about your? So Jesse, my fiance is. We don't get to say that very much. Is a trans person and is a coach that runs a gym, and there's a big old trans flag in the gym, which is awesome. And so anyone that walks in, they either see it and they're like, oh, trans flag, or else they're like, hey, what's that? And then he has a way to start a conversation with them. And I think speaking to including cis men, having stuff like that, where it's like, there's a big old trans flag, if that scares you, then out, but if not, like, welcome, I'm gonna be teaching you how to do this, and I'm a trans person. Like, so I think I've seen really cool things happen where people who might not be allies otherwise have been like, oh, that's just like a human, that's my coach, that's actually pretty cool, and they become allies who might not otherwise. So I think it's important to have those inclusive spaces, but I guess the question that then I would present is like, Chloe, you say like you love to answer questions and you're cool about that, and Jesse is too, like so patient and awesome about questions. But how do you balance like that self-care and like some days you just want to live and be a human and not be the one that has to answer everyone's damn questions about how to interact with trans people? Like, how do you balance that with educating people?
It's been my life, my entire life. Yeah. So before I was an adult, this has been my life. I fall very hard on the feminine binary. So most of my life, I'm not actually educating people. I'm just simply existing, and that is kind of the education. Most people don't know I'm trans until I bring it up. So I don't really have to find that balance for myself, but I seize the opportunities when I can.
I do think there's a lot. You talk about creating a space, so I'm not saying I would cut white men out of everything. Like, we've gone out of our way to create a space here. Right. And I have seen amazing transformations happen in here of people who had previously not been exposed to super queer world. Like, I grew up in super queer world. My dad's gay. My husband's mother is gay. Like, we have like I grew up in it. So creating that space, but that said, I still do put up filters to like keep out the because I'm pretty dedicated to that. But I think you're right that by simply existing together and knowing each other, hate comes from fear. We fear what we don't know. If you eliminate that what we don't know part, some of the fear can go away and maybe some of the hate can go away, and I think that's really essential. I make clear, like in our secret Facebook group for our page, that like we talk about this stuff all the time, and I'm also always saying you can ask me anything because it is not it's our members, it's not their job to educate people. I've happily taken this on because I can. And so I think that as we facilitate spaces, say this is a good place for conversation, I am a safe person to talk to. I think that's, you know.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, allies can play a big role in helping, like, to buffer that, it sounds like.
Like I think it's, you know, like.
We're nothing without our allies.
Chloe totally passes, so.
Sorry, I have so many questions.
Don't apologize. Never apologize.
What does cis actually stand for? I always wondered that.
Same. It's Latin for same.
Oh, it is? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and trans across.
Gotcha. Okay, I always wondered.
See, this is perfect. This is the questions I like. I didn't even know the answer.
You were going to tell the Dylan story.
Oh, it's just sort of so Dylan's another guy that does this with us. I love Dylan. I just love Dylan. Anyway, super tattooed, bearded dude, like, you know, walking down the street, you're like, whoa, super tattooed, bearded dude. He happens to be trans.
And owns a CrossFit gym.
And owns a CrossFit gym. If you're ever in New Orleans, Flambeau CrossFit. But it was so funny. Will and Dylan and I were in Denver, and it was like, Denver.
Was it Denver?
Yeah, because it was that janky third floor apartment couch. So we
I get some really cute Airbnbs for us.
Yeah, he did. It would be the end of a long day. We were traveling. We'd gone to the store. We came back, and Dylan, just lays down on the couch and was all like, ugh. He's like, y'all, I'm PMSing so hard right now. And it was just this great moment, right? Where you're like, oh, that's right, PMS. You know, like that's a thing. And it reminded me of another friend of mine who's a trans woman who's like super high fashion. Like, it's a fancy day when I shower. So when I have these like fancy friends, and she was wearing some cute little Chanel suit, and we're walking down the street, and she's like, God damn, my dick's in the way, you know? And it's like these great reminders that all we are just like, you know, we're meat suits, right? And we all have different parts in our meat suits, and they don't define us at all. And I love I did ask Dylan if I could tell that story, but it was such a great, like, oh, I'm PMSing so hard. He's like, I don't remember saying that, but it sounds like something I say once a month. So, actually, there is a reason why that matters. As we look at our political landscape, and I promise not to get political, but we look about things like healthcare and insurance. So the way insurance coding works, and Dylan tells this story, he hasn't legally had his papers changed. So all of his identification and everything else still says female. With a beard, yeah. Because if he ever wants to get a hysterectomy, that won't be covered if he's a man, right? So if you have a trans woman who has testicular cancer, that literally will not be covered by insurance. So some of these things, like people like to pretend that this is just preference and political correctness and whatever. It's life and death. Like it is actually for real. And there's this, Dylan also tells the story about not having his papers changed, is that he has this completely irrational fear of getting arrested. He is like the nicest, most law-abiding pacifist, like the dude's never gonna get arrested. But he's like, what if I get arrested and they throw me in with the men? I'm gonna get the crap beaten out of me. And I was like, dude, you're right, you know? So, yeah, so there's these underlying baseline systemic realities and fears for people that those of us who are walking around with all the privilege in the world are never gonna understand until some bearded dude sits down on a couch next to you and bitches about his PMS, right? And I feel like we need to create those opportunities so that we can learn from each other and that baseline humanity gets addressed. And you can see all the places in our system where people are literally risking their lives just for being who they are. That's not okay. Like, we need to do better than that as a world. So the Dylan story is super cute, but it highlights a real issue.
On that note, with the changing your papers thing, there's no criteria, right? Like no one, you don't have to like pass a test.
Oh, yes, you do.
Okay, so how does that work?
Most of the time you have to supply paperwork from a doctor.
And what criteria are the doctors using?
A diagnosis usually, is that what you're asking? A diagnosis usually.
So then that has to be off a list from some official book?
Yes. Yes. So it's different in every state, right? Everyone's different, but you could have to have doctors agree that yes, you are who you say you are, that yes, you feel like you feel, that they have to, in most places, call you ill in some way. Yeah, and it has to go through all of this insurance coding that then has to like allow this to happen, and then you have to have all that done and prove you did it in order to get your ID, and then you get your ID, and then what happens back to being a trans woman with prostate cancer, right? Yeah, so these things that we take for granted, yeah. So we're like, think back 5 years ago, we weren't even having these conversations, and we've actually come, we were talking at home last night or this morning, I don't know. The Castor Semenya stuff's really infuriating, except that this conversation's actually being had now. And it sucks that she has to go through this, and she shouldn't have to, but at the same time, 5 years ago, it was just like, she was just shoved off into a corner, and now we're actually, my Facebook timeline, granted, self-selecting, is all full of people having the conversation, so that's big,
And you have corporations still, like big corporations standing with her, like Nike.
Yeah.
And
yeah, Nike already put something out, so it's like,
Well, that's it for our presentation. Thank you all.